You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at MAYAAkai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 36 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. The podcast, I like to say, embraces salient topics, specifically from a mental wellness perspective. And it's a very broad mental wellness perspective, because if you've been tuning in for all 36 episodes, you realize we really kind of broaden the conversation about mental wellness as it flows through multiple domains in your life, so to speak. So don't get a little nervous when I say mental wellness, because I did not say mental health. Two different things I've differentiated at this point. So I like to think we grab some salient topics. I'm forward thinking in it. I like to pull back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage that plagues so many of us in our lives, that keeps us from getting to what we truly want, our ambitions. We have to learn how to harness our motivation to yield those best version of ourselves, being in those happy places. Key thing, daily. Not the overarching idea of the best version of yourself, but the idea that there's a best version of you that can exist every single day. And happiness is something that you should be seeking and pursuing and experiencing on a daily basis. Now, I always like to stamp a little warning on things and say that happiness doesn't mean that every day is going to be like sunshine and rainbows and it's like this amazing experience, sort of like you watch reality TV. And by the way, those are all edited together. No one's life is quite that intriguing and that interesting on a daily basis. So happiness isn't always about having something amazing happen every day. Sometimes it's just being content. Things worked out good. It was pleasant. There were no hiccups. There were no drama. That can be happiness. The best version of you might be you woke up that day, you went to work, it was a good day at work, you came home, and there was nothing that really took you off your square, and you felt like, you know what, today was a day I felt productive. That's the way I want you to start thinking about happiness and the best version of yourself. Stop putting these huge lofty goals on yourself, because often you'll often miss the mark just because you've put too much on the table. We're about setting the table place by place, everything from the plate, the bowl, the spoon, the glass, your different utensils, before we even set the meal on the table. So, of course, if you are a first-time listener, welcome. Buckle up for safety. Occasionally, you might get an unoccasional bump. So I may say something that may jar a memory you have, or something you've never considered about yourself, and you may say, okay, didn't quite think of it that way, but you gave me something to think about. And if you're a returning viewer or listener, then you know also how this works. Welcome back. Of course, always glad to have you here. But I always say, have paper and pencil. You might want to jot down something that might kind of give you something to chew on and think about. Remember, there's a rule we have here at M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, that you work at your own pace. Under no circumstance do you have to make sure you're always tuned in exactly when an episode airs. I enjoy the company. I love having live viewers, because the key thing is you can weigh your comments into the comment section, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, and I can share it with the rest of the viewing and listening audience. But it's more important that you get from what you need from the podcast. So if you're back in 20 or 25, because that's the one where you feel like you have to do the most work, or that's the one where something resonated with you and you said, I need to dig a little deeper into this because I don't have the kind of communication styles I want. And this gave me something to think about. Or, you know something, I do need to find my inner voice. Or wait a minute, I'm not comfortable with being an advocate for myself. So I might have to dig into these episodes a little bit more to be able to make sure I'm getting from them what I need. Because this isn't therapy. Remember, I'm your friendly neighborhood mental wellness advocate. Though I am a therapist counselor by training and by my job, this isn't about that. This isn't about laying on your couch and letting things out. It's for me to spark some interest in you, and you can work towards those things. And if you decide in the midst of listening some episodes that perhaps you'd like to pursue therapy, great. But that's not what this is about. So before we jump into the episode, remember I say, hopefully you're in this quiet space where you can really take this next 45, 50 minutes to focus just on you and nothing else. Have your beverage of choice. I'm doing tea today. You can do water. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, so you might have a cocktail. Don't care. Just want to make sure this is you and me time. So just make the most of it, because I often find people struggle with carving out time for themselves. And I'm like, if you're coming here week in and week out to listen to the episode, then you know what? You've taken that first step in carving out some time for yourself. And you probably didn't even realize it. So before we jump into the episode 36, time to clean up emotional messes. Ooh, and this is going to be juicy. And I've got some good stuff in here. So I'm looking forward to talking about this. Remember, you can always listen to past episodes of My Ambition, Your Ambition at MayaKime.com. Also remember, with each episode, I do some supplemental type things that you can go and read on my website. So if you go to the podcast resource section, there'll be some additional things that kind of expands the conversation a bit more, so to speak. So not just this, some other things. So just go to MayaKime.com, podcast resources, click on episode 36, and there you go. Hopefully by now you have subscribed to my YouTube channel. You can just go look for or search M.A.Y.A. I give the fair warning, you're going to find a whole bunch of things. I never thought M.A.Y.A. was such a common thing, but it's tied to a lot of Japanese anime. So when you scroll past all those things, you will find me. So subscribe, call to action, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you listen to my podcast via my website, thank you. I appreciate you supporting it that way. But everybody may have a preference, and I'm never one to judge preference. So if you happen to have a podcast platform of preference, I'm okay with that. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify. You can also find me on Amazon Audibles now. Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and then you can find my podcast. Last request, last call of action before we jump into episode 36. Get social with me. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai and Facebook, M.A.Y.A. Presents. And not only should you follow me, you should share me as well. I'm giving, so feel free to share. I won't judge you if you share me with other people. And so one time I actually say that and it's okay. So with that being said, if you want to weigh in your comments, I love the fact that Roburn is here. Aloha, because he is listening in from Hawaii. Every single week he's here and he shares my show. And I love that. Thank you so much for the support. But just like Roburn, if you want to share something with the listening audience right there, just type into Facebook or YouTube and I will share it on the screen. And if you happen to be listening, I'll read it. And if you're viewing it, then you see it. So that's how you can get interactive with the show at any point of time. If something kind of joggles a memory or you have a thought about a journey you're on, that's how you can get involved with the show. And I like when you like to get involved. So let's jump into, oh, I love this. And people, this is interesting because life is messy. Ooh, is life messy? I'm just going to tell you that. And with that messiness comes so many challenges of figuring out what to do with a mess. So we're going to spend this episode kind of giving you some framework to kind of start working on whatever mess you might have, because I always find people never like to do any real work until they're in a crisis mood. And this is the thing that drives me crazy with most people. They refuse to do any real heavy lifting when life seems okay, when they're in that comfort zone that I warned you about. But the minute they are challenged, pushed out their comfort zone, convenience isn't the same, or they're not controlling the situation, then everybody wants to run to somebody for support. But you are actually the core of your support. And if you would just do a little bit of the work, and I'm not talking about you because you're listening. I have tons of people who will totally go past my podcast because it's not relevant to them in their life because they're not in a needy or crisis moment. So they don't want to think about it. People don't think about their mental wellness or their mental health until it's compromised. The whole point of Maya is to get you think ahead of time, to be prepared, putting all those things in your toolbox that we talk about. So when you are challenged, because remember, you can't spell change, challenge without change. You can think back on some of the things that we talked about and start to use those things to help you navigate your difficult situation. So what do we always do at the start of every single show, and it has not changed, is we're going to go into our toolbox. What are you taking out your toolbox? Your emotional intelligence, your EI, which of course refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate not just your emotions, but others in a way that is also, let's just go ahead and take out what? Subjectivity or objectivity out of our toolbox. We have to learn to stop seeing things only from our perspective, but to be able to step back and see the larger picture of perhaps this happened because of this. It doesn't mean that's the right answer, but it's about being flexible in how you perceive things. Another great episode I did was about perception and perspective. They are two different things, and how you use them are so important in different situations. Semantics. Language is all about semantics, but when you dig into these words, you'll find, though they seem so similar and synonymous, there are subtle differences that will tell you when you should be using them. So when we talk about being the object of something or being subjective, it's really important. So toolbox time. You're taking out your emotional intelligence. You're taking out the, to be objective. You're putting objectivity on the table. And these are things you're going to use throughout every show. So pretty common. We do this all the time. So let's start with, what is a mess? And it's interesting because life is messy. There's nothing about it that's supposed to be absolutely everything is neatly and put in place. So I don't want you to think that. But messy gets into when you really it starts to function your ability emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. That's when you need to deal with your messes, when they become hindrances. We all have a little mess somewhere. Okay, let's be honest. Maybe we don't always make our beds up. Maybe there is a pile of clothes on the floor that's meant to be laundered. Whatever. Maybe sometimes we do get into our feelings, but we understand when we do. Life has those things that are inconsistent and imperfect. That's not what messy is about. Messy is when something legitimately becomes a hindrance to your progress. So, of course, I like to be literal about things when I talk about stuff. So let's just jump right into, by definition, if you were to go to Webster Merriam online and put in the word mess, mess will tend to come up. And it has a couple different definitions that are all very similar. A dirty or untidy state of things or of place. 2, a situation or state of affairs that is confused or full of difficulties. Or 3, which is the verb of it, to make untidy or dirty. That's the verb usage. So messy. I would say in most cases when we talk about this, we're going to work in all 3 of these definitions, because when we talk about those physical domains, that whole dirty, untidy state of things, place, applies. When we talk about more of your emotional, mental, financial, and spiritual domains, those are more situations or states of affairs that are confused or full of difficulties because of something that is creating clutter, too much clutter in those areas. So we're going to work through all these definitions as we kind of progress through the podcast. So we discussed, let's start with what messy is, but I kind of just talked about it, but we'll dive into it a bit more. What can be messy? And as I just said before, I mentioned all those domains that when I talk about your mental wellness, this overarching umbrella that my ambition, your ambition's about, it's these domains that we work in. It's your emotional, mental, financial, physical, and spiritual spaces. Some of these are tangible. Most of this is intangible. Something you can't hold, can't touch, doesn't have a material feel. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably far more difficult to regulate or maintain the things in your life that you cannot see, feel, touch, or taste than those things that you can. Because it means that you have to keep like this mental kind of Rolodex of things in your life, like flip. Okay, here's where emotion sits. Here's where my finances sit. It's like you're constantly having to keep track of things that you just always can't put your finger on. Human nature, this is why conversations about faith run so deep, is that faith requires the intangible, something you cannot see, touch, taste, feel. You just feel within the core, the gut of something. We usually talk about religion, so to speak, that higher power you subscribe to, whether you are spiritual, which you just kind of believe in the higher power, or if you directly, it's like, no, I believe in God or Yahweh, Muhammad, whatever it is that you follow, you do it because of the faith, that feeling internally that drives you to say that in essence of this is something that resonates with me, that I am strongly connected to. That's why spirituality is always a very interesting construct. And when people have it versus when people don't have it, there is no right or wrong. I tell people that. But people who tend to have it, it's a different type of thing than someone who doesn't. And in therapy, I tend to see that. Faith and religion or spirituality pops up really quickly with my clients when they have it. They will say flat out, I'm putting in God's hands, or there's a reference to something like that. So instantly I know I'm dealing with a person who has that spiritual vein that they work through. On other hands, if no one ever brings up anything about God or spirituality, I don't discount that they may not be religious people, but it may not be high ranking in how they feel. They may just kind of subscribe to the higher being, but it isn't their driving force. I work with people who are agnostic, which means I subscribe to nothing. Faith is there, but I'm not really tied into it. I've dealt with people who are atheist. They think it is the most strangest idea to believe in something that absolutely has no proof of existence. They just cannot get with it. Again, as a therapist, it is not my role to help you figure that piece out. That's a personal journey. So that's one of those domains, especially with messiness, can be interesting, and I'll tell you why that is. So we talked about those domains that we work in. This is what M.A.Y.A is all about, but especially when we're trying to tidy up and take messy into being a bit more organized. Order. These are the areas we're going to talk about today. So it's ultimately time for a real talk time. I enjoy the real talk times. I really, really do. So when we talk about messes, the thing I need for you to distinguish between is your mess, their mess, and our mess. There's all kind of messes in the world. And you know what? We tend to like to sweep them under the rug or all into one pile. And see, that creates more confusion because that means you're not discerning and giving attention to things and separating out so that you can have more order because you've collectively put them together. A lot of people make their messes and my messes, our messes, when they shouldn't be that way. So when you start doing these domains and you're working through your emotional mess, you need to figure out what part of this mess is really mine and who done walked over here and dumped some stuff in my mess. Seriously, you got to separate. If you're having this emotion about something that happened with somebody else, you got to ask yourself, is this true emotion? Here's where your EI is big. This is where the EI is huge. Is this driving emotion that I'm having? Because now you're evaluating this. You're perceiving and you're evaluating. Is this really about me when you say I've gotten in my feelings? Am I in them by myself, or did somebody slide something in my emotional drink? Ask yourself that question. That's what it comes down to. So when you really start to separate out your messes, just like you sort clothes when you do laundry, you just don't put all your clothes in one wash and go. You know, if you do your laundry correctly, I'm not one to judge. You're going to have your whites, you're going to have your colors, you may have your delicates. You separate those things out. Oh, and by the way, and even when you put them in the washer, you may wash in cold water, warm water, on the gentle cycle. Guess what? Cleaning up your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual house is exactly like doing laundry. Real talk. Someone's like, you got to be kidding me. You know why? Because we all hate to do laundry. So I already know this conversation, that analogy just pissed a lot of people off. Like, I don't even like doing laundry. Now you're telling me to sort out this part of my life. It's going to be like doing laundry. And I bet the next question you're going to ask me is, do I have to fold? Yes, you do. Anyways, but really, it's like it's that huge piece of understanding that sorting out your life is like laundry. You're separating out things because they require a certain type of attention. Color clothes, you wash them on a certain temperature. You may even use a certain kind of detergent. If you give that kind of care to your clothing, can I ask you a question? Why would you not give that kind of care to your emotions and your mental state and where you're at spiritually, physically, and even financially? I mean, to be honest, people probably haven't given a lot of time. Chew on this as we talk about this real talk, because this is really seriously. Life may be messy, but it is only us that can mess our lives up. Some people will struggle with that idea. Sit on that for a minute. Just sit there. I want you to read it. If you're just listening, I'll read it again. Life may be messy, but it's only us that can mess our life up. What this ultimately says is, you are accountable for the things that unfold in your life. You are accountable for those you allow to step into your life. You're accountable when you see somebody walking into your life with a basket or baggage, and you look at it, and you're saying to yourself, they have a whole lot of laundry. Where are they going with that? Where are they going to put that? As I said last week, and I'm going to keep saying it, because we love sayings. Be careful when you say, be present, meet me where I'm at. Well, my first question now, especially through I say I have finally graduated in the love department and learned a whole lot after my last relationship. It was the final lesson I had to have. And I finally came to realize before you decide to meet someone where they're at, if you have to step backwards to get there, you better ask yourself, when I step backwards, how is this advantageous? Is it specifically for me? Selfish? Selfless? What am I sacrificing? And the sacrifice I'm willing to make to step back to meet somebody, is it worth it? And have they done the work? And why are they there? I always say to people, and I truly, truly mean this. When I hear that saying, I'm a ride or die chick, I flat out tell people, I'm not a ride or die chick. Because one, I need to know where we're going. And why does it involve me dying? Someone's like, Maya, you're being too literal. I said, no, I'm not. I'm asking the appropriate questions. Because I'm trying to figure out why that kind of saying even exists. I know it's meant I got your back. I'm right there with you. We square. I totally get it. But you need to ask the right questions when you emotionally and mentally open yourself up to people. This is not just romantic relationships. This exists in relationship dynamics with our families, peers at work, our friends. When you're willing to like walk the line and go the distance and stare over the edge with somebody, ask yourself, why are we here? And especially if someone keeps walking you to the edge, you need to say, why do you keep ending up in this position all the time? And I'm going to stop walking here with you. You're going to go by yourself. But we're so afraid to really challenge those things. So that's real talk. Make sure you can distinguish between what's your mess, what's their mess, and what's our mess. And when you say it's our mess, I need you to really say, why is it our mess? How much are you bringing to it? How much are they bringing to it? What does it consist of? And if it's a consistent mess, why is it a consistent mess? An example of that would be often when people are in relationships or they're married, you may find that there might be financial messes. One person is a saver, one person is a spender. And sometimes a person who tends to be better with money often isn't the person controlling the money. They let the not good with money person do it, and they find they're in this absolutely financial bad place. And it's not that they don't make enough money to survive, it's how they use their money for whatever reason. You can deal with that mess and say, okay, we keep having debt, but we clearly make enough money. We need to make a budget. And that person gives you pushback on that, then you know what? That means you might need to go along some different lines. And I'm really serious about this. I've met more people who say, I have a separate account than my significant other, meaning their spouse. They said, because very wasteful with money. And I'm not going to be in that position with them. And they have this agreement. You're not good with money. They have a joint account where things get paid. But if you decide you want to deplete your money because you want to be wasteful, then that's your waste. It's not our waste. That takes courage to speak up like that, because most people will allow that type of inconsistency to exist in their life. And how many times have finances ruined relationships or marriages because people didn't have the courage to step up and to say, we're not doing this right because we keep having the same issue. And I feel like we make enough money where this shouldn't be going on. And or maybe we don't make enough money to fit the lifestyle that we keep acting like we have. What's another thing that M.A.Y.A totally likes to dispel? Don't fake it till you make it. Be who you are in the moment. So guess what? If you want to live on a champagne budget, but you straight beer, then you're straight beer until you can be champagne. That's just how this works. And a person who's real, who wants to do better and who wants to be in a better place will stop creating that unnecessary stress because they can't seem to get to where they want to be because they're not making the adjustments, the proper adjustments to get there. That's just the bottom line. If you want to be in a certain place, you have to look at where you are and figure out how to get to that place. In the meantime, you make the adjustments within your financial life, so to speak, if we're talking finances, to be there. But don't feel like you have to not do that because for some reason who are you impressing? If you're not impressing you, I don't know what to tell you. Because at the end of the day, if someone does not pay your bills or does not go to work with you every day, I struggle to figure out why we are so enmeshed in what other people think. It's hard though, because our society is really hardwired to make us really care what other people think. It takes a lot to grow past that because even I've been in that space. I mean, I wasn't like heavy in caring what people thought, but there were some people who had heavy impressions on how I kind of lived my life at one point. And when I realized, why am I doing this? At the end of the day, they're no perfect than, I am. So I'm going to be me. But it took a lot of physical, and honest acceptance and accountability for why I was making some choices that really weren't in my best interest. And that's what it comes down to. Facts. Thank you, Burn. That's what it comes down to. This is about you. And when you learn that the best version of you is about you and not about somebody else, which means the adjustments that you make in your life should be according, that's when things will kind of turn a corner for you. When you really get in touch with you, when you really start to be like, man, I am really digging myself. I achieved this and I'm so excited about this. The minute you start getting excited about you and your life is when you're going to see a shift, even the small things, because the small things is what this really, really is about. Let's have a podcast thread. This is something that I actually started, I want to say 2 episodes ago, because I found there were some reoccurring things that were kind of weaving through podcast. Last week's podcast was about boundaries being necessary. Go back and listen to boundaries. I got more conversations about boundaries with people than I ever thought I would. They're like, okay, first of all, didn't think about boundaries, don't have no boundaries. Nobody taught me boundaries, and I feel guilty having boundaries. So what do I do about this? Different mixture of what people came back and said to me. Knowing your boundary, knowing your individual needs and wants, which helps you to create your boundaries, can help you to sort out what messes belong to you. And someone was like, that's interesting. I said, well, because if you don't know what it is that you need to get to that best version of yourself, and if you don't know what you need to achieve that everyday happiness, that means you're just kind of going through life just doing anything. But once you figure out, I need this is important. I want this, but these have to be met first. Needs must come before want. I will tell you, if you keep putting wants before needs, you will keep failing consistently at most things you're doing because needs always have to exist. For my psychology people and somewhere along the line, you probably heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It starts with basic needs must be met before you can actually get to self-actualization. That's a part, and that's real. So if you're trying to do the big things first before the little things, the big things never really hold up because what are they built on? Nothing. Needs are foundations. Wants are the icing on the cake. And the minute you realize that is when things can be done a little bit differently for you. Welcome to the show, Vernon Fairley. Oh, you like my hair? Oh, yeah, I'm trying some new stuff. I'm having midlife crisis hair stuff, which is interesting. But I fault my dad for that. I went from having great curly hair to now it's going wavy on me. I'll live. I got hair, so I'm cool. Whatever. But thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Juliet Copeland, thank you for tuning into the show. Her story is so amazing to me. And I want to have her on as a guest because everything I talked about, to me, she embodies it. Talk about having adversity, especially with health issues. And this young lady battles through it, puts motivating things out there to people. When I say she has been challenged emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically, and yet she rises like cream, I'm telling you, you need to hear her story. Because for everybody who thinks it's the worst, I guarantee you, I can tell you somebody's story. And in my job as a crisis worker, I hear bad news all the time. Just when you think your life is just an absolute crap, or I'll be adult shit show. It's not. It just needs some tweaking and some changes. It's about how we approach this. So Juliet, thank you for tuning in. And I look forward to having you on as a guest on the show because you're all about what my ambition, your ambition's about. I've never seen more ambition in anybody. It's amazing. Your story is just so great. And I can't wait to share it with people. But the podcast thread. So in episode time, we talked about the boundaries piece. And as I said, you have to know those needs versus the wants because they help you to sort through your messes. So you might look at your messes and you might say, you know something? A whole lot of what's sitting in front of me is because my needs are not being met. Here's another one. I'm not messy. I'm organizationally challenged. Seriously, I'm organizationally challenged. I have a handle on some things. I'm just not organizing them properly because, to be honest, I wasn't sorting things out, needs and wants. So now I'm starting to sort out my emotional and mental laundry, so to speak. And by the way, if you happen to be, I love the smell of fresh spring clothes. Okay, you might have a clothesline outside. Just don't hang your undergarments. That's all. Does anybody even still do that? That's a kid memory of literally being at my grandma's house, and she had a clothesline, a double clothesline nonetheless, and we'd have to go out and hang clothes. And the thing about it was those clothes smelled so good. Just a random memory, but there's a point about not necessarily hanging out your undergarments because you don't necessarily want people to see those. But sheets and other clothes, go ahead, air them out. Let it breathe. Just be careful what you let breathe in front of other people. But that organizational piece is really huge because you have to know those needs and those wants. And the boundary piece comes in is because once you determine what you need, you'll know what you need to get it. You'll determine what you need to get it. But the wants are the things that sometimes will compromise you. Wants sometimes will make people keep walking straight to the edge because wants tend to be very, very desirous. And as humans, we tend to love desire, and we tend to gravitate to bad things. Look, it's our nature. We're curious. Be careful with your wants so that they don't compromise when you establish your needs and you keep starting over because you let your wants dominate your needs. So you got to have even boundaries within those things, not just boundaries with other people, but a boundary with yourself to say, okay, as my grandma would say, may she rest in peace, enough is enough and too much stank. She would say that all the time when I was a kid. And I'd be like, what? Makes sense. Totally makes sense. So we talked about boundaries last week in regards to other people, but I need you to know you need to have boundaries for yourself. Know when you really, I got to stop right here because I know if I keep going, I'm going to cross over. I'm going to mess everything up that I've been working on. Know your boundaries. These needs have to be met. This is a want, but how much risk am I willing to put out there to get this want? Is that want really that important in my happiness? That's what it comes down to. You have to determine where that boundary you make with yourself is. Because when you start with boundaries with yourself, having boundaries with other people gets a lot easier because you'll be like, well, I pumped the brakes on me, so I'm full stop on you. For real. Nope. But that's a huge awakening piece. Having boundaries with yourself is called accountability and discipline. And we struggle with that, especially in a world sometimes when instant gratification is what we so frequently are used to, and being patient and waiting or doing a little heavy lifting often turns people off. So they like the quick and easy. Quick and easy, usually, is destructive in some way. I'll be honest. It's not long lasting, nor is it sustainable. And we're looking to do things within M.A.Y.A, my ambition, your ambition, that's truly about sustainability. Just keep that in mind. So that's that podcast thread from last week. 35 rode right into 36. So we're going to get into our toolbox time. We only have one of these for the show. This is one for me that's huge, and it kind of keeps building on the podcast thread. Messy boundaries. You must understand what you need to achieve and maintain happiness and being the best version of yourself, which I just talked about, and where you draw the line on when you feel compromised, when you've compromised yourself, and when you feel compromised by others. Sit for that. And I'm going to share something for you that totally embodies it, and everybody knows this. It goes as simply as this: when you keep compromising yourself for others or for immediate gratification, or not having that insight to know that something really isn't what you need, but just what you want. How many times have you felt like this?
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Well, we all know that scene, right? And that scene is classic for a couple reasons. One, because Pacino is just amazing. That's the first thing. For all my Godfather people, and of course, Scarface, my fellow Cubans, we know that's our love. Because it's a good movie, not just because he was a Cuban movie. But the key thing about that statement is, just when I thought I was out. Keyword is thought. They pull me back in. Everything about the staging of that scene is key, because if you listen in the background, you hear thunder and lightning, which just goes to say, with conflict and messes, it's usually destruction, a storm that comes with messes consistently. So the reason I play that, I got to do it one more time because I can't help myself.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
What I need you to understand about that is, if you don't know, the key word is think. I thought I was out. I need you to know that you're out of your messes. That's the key thing. If you don't take the time to sort through your messes, your mess, their mess, our mess, if you don't sort out your messes and begin to work through them individually to kind of reduce what you have, you'll keep adding something else because you haven't taken the time to honestly know what you need. So the warning with that is simple as this: know and uphold your boundaries with yourself and with others. Don't just identify them. Stop stepping in the messes like, oh, I know this is an issue. No, you know it's an issue, so clean up that issue. Now, mind you, there are some messes that sometimes we just can't really get rid of. They're kind of long-term messes. Like, you know what, you might be a neater person, but sometimes your room might get a little clutter in it. I'm guilty of that. I'll clean my room, and then I'll be like, because I'll be busy. I'll be working 10-hour shifts, X amount of days a week. And I'll be honest, I'm not coming home to think about doing certain things. So certain things kind of get piled up. And then when I'm off, I clean up again. I'm conscious of my mess. But the thing is, I look at it and say, I got to do that. I got to take care of that. That's getting out of control. Know and uphold your boundaries. Don't just identify what they are. Oh, it's great to know you have this mess, but to not clean it up is not acceptable. That's why they say, oh, you keep sweeping things under the rug and now you can't ignore it anymore. That's what it comes down to. It's so, so important to know and uphold your boundaries. That was episode 35. I will tell you to go jump into it because it was absolutely a fantastic episode. I enjoyed it. This one kind of came from it a little bit. Thank you for joining the show, Brandy Harris. She said, absolutely. I definitely have to pump the brakes on myself because, woo, child, things can get out of hand quickly. But see, Brandy, who I've known for a while, we talk about emotional intelligence. It is the best tool in your toolbox because you perceive, I'm getting warm. This is really getting this is about to make me get upset. You evaluate, wait a minute, why am I about to get upset? And then you act accordingly. Let me remove myself from the situation before I do something like react opposed to respond. Because remember, two of the next tools we're trying to put in that toolbox is how to respond to things versus reacting to things. And this is where that emotional intelligence piece is so important to use it. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, well, we talked about some things earlier. So where do things get messy? And we've already talked about this a little bit earlier in the show. Things get messy in different domains. They get messy financially, physically, mentally, emotionally. They do. Those are the domains that we tend to work in. But before we jump into those domains, we're going to take a quick break because this is Autism Month, and I want to share this message with you because I think it's important. And we'll come back and we'll dig into, those domains and kind of start to flesh them out. So as you're sorting through what's making you messy, you'll know exactly the areas that you should be focused on and specifically what you should be looking for when you're in those domains. Sit tight. You're tuned into M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 36. We're talking about how to not keep getting messy. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
Autism is a spectrum disorder. This means it affects each and every person differently. People with autism explore the world in unique ways. It's time to start seeing autism from a new perspective. I'm Megan Sinisi, Miss Central Pennsylvania, asking you to pledge to be an acceptance ambassador today at FromANewPerspective.org. With your help, we can inspire a community of inclusion for the 3.5 million Americans living with autism.
Accept, respect, empower.
What a play by Bill Russell!
I just arrived to get my COVID shot, and this is one shot I won't block.
Gratitude to a great ball club for a courageous effort.
No Celtics were harmed during my shot. Let's do this together. To learn more about vaccines, visit cdc.gov.
Compassion, noun. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. We're all born with it. It's in us. Don't believe me? When you hear a baby cry, something pulls at you. You want to ease that pain. You want to soothe that hurt. No one had to teach you that. It's called compassion, and it's in you. However, at some point you turned it off when it came to me.
Me. The cries of my soul have gone unheard, but today, you will hear me.
My heart has wailed a melody loud enough to shatter your ears, and you ignored me. But this week, you will hear me.
This body has beat the drums of anguish, only to be silenced. But this month, you will hear me.
This year,
this decade,
this century,
I will be heard, and
you will be the one to hear me.
And when I am finally heard,
show compassion.
Show compassion.
Show compassion.
Remember, it's in you.
Welcome back to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Not too often that I actually do any kind of commercial break, but there's some things I want to start to share. So I figured it was a good place midway through the show. That was a wonderful One Chicago campaign. There's actually 3 to it. I'll end the show with the third of the 3. Just interesting things. It's called I'm Tired. And why I love this is because all of these PSAs are about that self-advocacy. It's about finding your voice. When she says, you will hear me. And this is what I need people to get used to and embracing the idea of when you find that voice, don't be afraid to be heard. Everybody's not going to like what you have to say. Seriously, they're not. But if it's your truth doesn't mean you should be rude to people either. It just means you should learn how to express yourself properly. It's not incumbent that everybody expresses or understands the same sentiment that you do. This is where we fall short so often in relationships and even in society. We are not homogenous by nature. We are all humans. We may have similarities, but it's our differences that make us unique. This happens in relationships as well. Stop thinking that somebody has to resonate with you or even understand where you're coming from, because the whole point of that PSA is about compassion. And I would tell you empathy is even more important, because empathy will say, I can't say I exactly understand your situation because I have not walked a mile in your shoes, but I hear what you're saying. And I'm going to try to understand where you're coming from and be supportive. It doesn't mean I have to absolutely totally get it or say, yeah, I get it. Because that's actually insulting if somebody tries to own your experience and it's not them, and you shouldn't want them to. What you want to hear someone say when you start to express how you feel or your truth is, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how you felt. I hear you now. How can I be supportive? That's what empathetic people do. They don't become defensive, because sometimes people do a lot of things. We talked about the 80-20 rule. 20% of what the action is 80% of the outcome. The percentile principle is what it's called. So just know that often people don't necessarily, now mind you, there are some people who do act with the intention of being destructive, and you have to identify those people and take them out of your circle. But generally speaking, if you feel you have a good circle of people, don't be afraid to say something if it bothers you. Because generally speaking, if you let it add up, it turns into a worse situation. I had a fantastic conversation with a fellow Aquarian today about a situation that happened with her son. And we're talking, and I said, look, we talk about emotional intelligence all the time. And no, I'm not being therapeutic with her. It's just how she and I talk to each other. And I said, you have to tell him how you feel. I say this to people all the time throughout therapy. 1, people only love you the way they know how. By the way, that doesn't mean that's the right way, and it may not be the way that you want to be loved. So you have to step back and say, am I not getting what I need from this situation because this person is refusing to give it to me? Or do they actually not know how to give it to me because they never got it themselves? This is where the EI jumps in and helps you to start to evaluate things. So just know if you're not getting something before you jump to the worst case scenario. Oh, they're just being, selfish, maybe. Maybe they don't know they're being selfish. Some people live in such a silo emotionally, they don't know differently. And because they've never experienced what can be a pure version of love, by the way, that pure version is unique to them or to you. I keep telling people, stop thinking that everything is set in stone, because it's not. So you have to determine, when you run into those brick walls with people, am I at this brick wall because this person has erected this brick wall and they wanted me to run into it? Or is this legitimately how they are because they don't know how to do anything differently? So how people receive your conversation when you're expressing how you feel, or as we like to say, your truth, or if you're trying to be transparent. No, everybody's not good with transparency. It makes them nervous. They've never experienced it. They don't know what to do with it. So if someone does not respond to you the way you wish they would when you share something, like you thought this is about to be a big moment, we're about to have an emotional and mental epiphany together, and it turns to fall flat on its face, don't get upset. Think about the person you're about to share something with in your mind. Don't make an assumption of how you think they will receive it. But if you've had past experience of how they've received things, then you can be like, this may not go good, this could go good. How can I say this in a way that it can be received the way that I need for it to be received? And that's why I always say setting up your conversational table is so important, that I need to share something with you that's really been bothering me. Not to say that this was your intention, but this is just how I've been feeling. And maybe I'm off base, but I figure if I don't say something to you, this doesn't get resolved. And if a person is there with you, they're going to listen. But everybody doesn't have the same emotional intelligence. And you have to kind of figure out what that other person is. And some people have even worse emotional regulation, to tell you the truth. So if you're in that uphill battle with someone like that, depending on the nature of the relationship, I'd ask you why you're still there. Unless it's like a mandatory must-have relationship, like parental relationships, kind of you got to be present. But I'm like, if it's toxic, feel free to limit it, And there's nothing wrong with that. People feel guilty when they limit negative or toxic people in their life because they feel they have to keep them in the fold, and you don't. You can limit the actual exposure unless you're like me and you could just cut things loose and not mind it. As long as I got my cats, I'm good. I can let people go. No, I'm just kidding. Not really. Anyways, so where do things get messy? That's where we were before we jumped into the break. We talked about those domains. So let's quickly kind of go over to what a financial or material mess could look like. You have to determine whether you can give or lend things such as your money, car. Does it cause problems, and why? If you don't like to lend money because it either has put you in a financial mess, you lend people a car, they didn't take care of it, they didn't put gas back in it, they didn't think that much of it, or you let somebody come and stay with you and you realize that wasn't a good situation because though you've given them a place to stay, maybe they're not reciprocating as you had discussed. So maybe you said, if you stay here, I need this, this, and this, or maybe you put no constraints on it, no time frames, boundaries. That can create a mess. When you step outside your boundaries or you go past your boundaries, this is where messes are made. That's why boundaries were so important. Episode 35. So know where you stand about money, space, cars, things like that. Because if those kind of things cause issue, like stop lending money to people who you know won't pay you back. Or you lend it knowing they're not going to pay you back. So don't get upset, because it's where emotional intelligence comes in. Don't get upset when someone fails to do what you expected them to do, when you and I both know you put high expectation on a low performing person. I said it, you put high expectations on a low performing person. They just do not do what they are supposed to do, and you know it. So if you give something to someone, do it because you're doing it from the kindness of your heart. Don't do it with the expectation they're going to pay you back. And don't make lofty or large, don't give large things unless you know you can afford to do it if it puts you into a financial strait, because these kind of things are what makes relationships messy. You get mad at them for not paying you back, and you get angry with yourself for lending it because being that you might be a giver in the core of who you are, you just felt the need to do it. 2, that physical messes, that's a personal space, privacy, body space, things like that. No, this can get messy because when you live with people, if you're not on the same page, like the person who will leave a sink full of dirty dishes, and you're always doing the dishes, or you're always taking out the trash, or you're the person who always cleans, that makes relationships messy. Because you feel like all the burden has fallen on you. Burden turns into a mess, because burden turns into getting angry, upset, sometimes depressed, anxiety, because it keeps piling on. You keep taking on more responsibility because you're dealing with a person who can't handle their responsibility, partially because you didn't tell them, look, I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm not going to keep doing this with you. I love this. Roburn, our parents and grandparents have some of the best sayings. My mama used to say, never loan something you can't lose. I agree. If you can't lose it, don't give it away. That's like wisdom from our, obviously our older individuals. It's there. They were telling us these things when we were younger. We just didn't quite get it at the time because our emotional intelligence wasn't there. We got some experience, and then we began to understand a lot of the sayings that people would say to us. But that physical space thing. So if you're dealing with somebody who's messy, look, tell them, this is how you clean this mess up. Like, look, I'm not going to keep taking out the trash. And it's important not to be confrontational. So here's the proper way to do it. And hopefully this works. And if not, you may have to get more drastic. Inbox me if you need to know what drastic means. You know something? I've been super busy. We both have been busy. And I feel like things in the house are just getting out of control. Can we kind of make a schedule how we can both kind of do things? Because we just I think the trash sits longer, the dishes, because we're both so busy. So how about this? On this day, you do all this week. And put it on the refrigerator. These are your days to put dishes in the dishwasher and to take out the trash. And I'll do the kitchen, you do the bathroom, blah, 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 blah. Give yourself chores. I know it sounds irresponsible. We do it to children all the time. Those of us that got chores as children, we tend to be able to follow through as adults. Those people who did not will probably struggle with this. Now, if you put this in place and it doesn't happen, give the friendly reminder, hey, this was your week to take out the trash. You didn't take out the trash. It's overflowing. Subtle reminders. Then you have to make a decision if this is just something you can deal with. And if it can't, because some people are very particular about their space, it can be messy that way. So just be mindful of understanding your personal space, what it looks like, privacy. Another kind of personal privacy space. Sometimes do you have to tell people, like, I'm going to share something with you? Please don't repeat this to somebody else because I'm just telling you. Now, mind you, I'm the kind of person, I don't repeat anything that anybody says to me. I don't know if it's just a confidentiality thing is ingrained in my head at this point as a therapist. But when people tell me stuff, I'm making the assumption you told me for a reason. And it's not for me to share. A lot of people struggle with that. They go and share something with somebody else. Family members are really guilty of this. So if that's something you struggle with, I'm going to tell you something. Opposed to creating that emotional mess in your family, just know when somebody can't hold water, don't give them water to carry. That's what it comes down to. Knowing your boundary. I don't like when people tell my business, so keep your business to yourself, or you find that person, like your friendly neighborhood therapist, who you can share it with, who, guess what, can carry all the water you ask for, and they're never going to spill a single drop. But anyways, so know things, privacy, boundaries. You have some people who just don't like being touched and hugs and things like that. No, that can create a physical mess. I have a person who likes to hug everybody. And it's like, okay, no people's boundaries. Know your boundaries. Just because you're all touchy-feely, huggy-huggy, doesn't mean everyone's going to meet you there. And sometimes you need to dial that back, because all of a sudden that can make a person be like, I don't particularly care for that person. They're just a little team too much for me. Boundaries creates messes when you cross over. That mental mess, thoughts, values, and opinions. Do you have cognitive clutter, and why? Are you not able to process something? See, I'm a compartmentalizer, which means when something happens to me, I take it in, I use my emotional intelligence, I'm perceiving, I'm evaluating, and then I'm controlling how I'm responding. And when I deal with something, but mind you, I had to do some cleanup work on this. I take that situation and I put it in my little box in my mind and I file it. I came to realize about a year ago, I had cognitive clutter because I had so many things I had stored away. I hadn't dumped or released certain things. Why I decided to mentally or emotionally store it, I have no idea. So cognitive clutter is, have you not reconciled things that need to be dealt with to move them off your table? Sometimes cognitive clutter can look like this. You think you've dealt with something, and maybe you thought you did, until something happens, and all of a sudden, that situation you thought you resolved rises back up, and the emotion comes with it. And you're like, wow, that's cognitive clutter. Because you can't see in your mind, and you can't see your emotions. And you don't know sometimes you're cluttered until you feel overwhelmed. When you feel emotionally and mentally underwhelmed, that means you got a hell of a mess going, and you need to clean some things out. This is the thing about baggage. I was joking with my Aquarian friend, my sister, and I said to her, I said, look, I'm to a point in my life, this is real talk. If I'm dating somebody, if you come in the door with like a 7-piece Louis Vuitton set, I'm looking at you like, where you going? You got too much stuff. I was hoping you would just show up with an emotional book bag. And I know it sounds silly, but if somebody comes into a relationship with you, including friends, and they got a whole lot of baggage, Erykah Badu, bag lady, you gonna hurt your back. Seriously, ask them what they got in them bags. Like, oh, you have a lot of bags. What you got? Where are you going? And why do you have so much? Sometimes people just keep putting stuff and carrying it with them because they're too afraid to process their emotions because it's painful. Sometimes there's underlying trauma. And often when there's trauma, and I'm going to tell you something, we call trauma big T, little t, a whole nother show. Sometimes some people have got so accustomed to trauma, usually little t trauma, they don't even know they're carrying it. And that's where it gets messy, because that trauma sometimes, not sometimes, frequently flows into your other relationships. It's damaging to yourself, and it tends to complicate or damage other relationships that you have. So being mindful of your mental mess is really important. It's really important. Mental and emotional mess kind of go hand in hand. They really, really do. Where's your emotional intelligence, and where's your emotional regulation? Are you truly utilizing these tools? Because if you keep reacting opposed to responding, that means you're not using either one of those. If you've managed to see some variation, like hey, you know what? I still get a little hot-headed, because at the core of who we are, I'm not a hothead, but I can get irritated. I can. And I've learned to dial that back. I attribute it to partially being an only child. So, I think I was giving too much liberty at times. But I was also disciplined, FYI. I wasn't just out there, just not doing what I was supposed to do. But just know that we're working on learning how to respond to things, and what that encompasses literally is your emotional intelligence and emotional regulation working together. You see the problem. The emotional regulation piece is that latter piece of emotional intelligence. It's the control. So it's like, now that I have perceived and evaluated the situation, this is how I'm going to respond to it. So we don't talk a whole lot about emotional regulation, but now that's the next big tool that we've put into your toolbox that you need to start to use. It's key. And that final piece is that spiritual mess. Where is your energy? Are you living along the tenets that you have decided guide you morally and ethically? And it's pretty straightforward in the sense that if you, this is just simple. If you are not living in accordance of what your core values are, what you morally think is appropriately, ethically, if you're compromising yourself constantly, then you have a mess going on. And you got to ask yourself is, why am I constantly compromising myself? Because there clearly should be, how you are living should be reconciled. That can be the word for the day. Reconciling is how you deal with messes, literally with how you think, feel. And the reason I kind of put this into that spiritual religious tenet, because that's where I think we tend to find our morality and our ethics. So I'm not saying you have to subscribe to God or a higher power. I don't care. But wherever you get your source of ethics and morality, are you a mirror of that? Are you congruent? So if you believe in one thing, but you're out here doing something different, my first question is, why are you not congruent? What's compromising that way? What boundaries do you keep crossing that you can't be congruent with how you want to be morally and ethically? And that's where people really struggle, because if you keep making adaptations to make other people happy, chances are you're going to keep compromising yourself on a regular basis. It's pretty straightforward with that. So now that we kind of talked about where messes come from or kind of where they're at, and you kind of waited out to figure out how to sort out your emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial messes, just like laundry, ask yourself, how can I learn to manage my messes? How can I learn to manage my messes is key. Here's real talk time too. And I just kind of said it. We talked about kind of going through those different domains. It's pretty straightforward. If you're still reacting versus responding to your environmental and emotional stimuli, it's time to look into ways that you can cope with these things. So when I say environmental stimuli, environments and emotions really go hand in hand. Environments can tend to exacerbate a situation. For instance, sometimes they say you shouldn't talk about religious and politics with people. Maybe something said about that. You probably shouldn't talk about certain things with people when you've been drinking. You know why? Because when you're drinking, your filter gets turned off. Look, I can say it. I've had some hot and heated arguments with people when I've had too many libations. Anyways, because you know what? And I have to tell myself, Maya, you should walk away, because you're about to have a moment with somebody because they've pissed you off. And you know what? And you're going to start reacting and not responding. Seriously. I'm joking, but no, I'm being serious about that. I've had those moments. But anyways, but I'm responding and not reacting. And that's what's key. So it's important when you are in environments where maybe something is negative and things are mounting up and it's creating that emotional stimuli, or sometimes the emotional stimuli part might be you're with somebody who is having a difficult moment. They are, struggling with something, and their emotion flows over into you. Again, boundaries are huge. Somebody asked me in the scope of my job of being a crisis worker, they said, how do you manage to not have that overwhelm you? Well, one, for the longest time, I thought it didn't overwhelm me because I'd come home and thought I was okay. And then it became overwhelming to me only when things within my personal life started to mount up, like loss in regards to death and some other things, and, and the mortality of parents. And then that's all of a sudden when the stressors at work that I was handling so perfectly well before I was stressed outside of work, all of a sudden started bumping heads. And so I was like, well, I'm not managing this very well. And I noticed it, how I was more stressed. My temper was shorter, all those things. That was the emotional intelligence piece. So if you happen to be in a situation that's stressful at work, or if you're in a stressful relationship, you have to figure out ways that you can neutralize those things as much as possible. It's not always that you can make it 100% to your favor, but get it at least 70 if you can, because the 30 might be out of your control. Work everything to your advantage as much as you can to strike balance, because balance is something we talk about through episode to episode as well. That would be another podcast thread. Striking a balance in everything is so important. Stop having this imbalance of too much of something and not enough of something else. Find where it sits in the middle. Even though I'll be honest, sometimes imbalance is succulent. I know that's wrong. We're human. And as humans, we sometimes still love that little bit of the edge. Because you know what? Let's be honest. Walking on the edge occasionally, and I ain't trying to fall off. Let me just say that. It's fun and it's exciting. And that's why sometimes we do those limits, because we cross our boundaries. Because sometimes we're like, I could just use a little excitement right now. But I'm not a ride or die. Where are we going? And why is there death anywhere involved in this? But anyways, it's key. So you want to work on, if you're reacting still, or maybe if you've minimized, you've noticed, I don't react as much, that's good. But now we're going to work that whole emotional environment stimuli. Like, let's pinpoint, if you're still reacting to something, what are the things that make you react that's creating this mess for you emotionally? Because if you're sorting things out by now, that mess should be getting smaller. There might still be a little bit of a mess because we're humans. We don't lose everything about ourselves and our emotions and can fully always control them. You might throw a tantrum behind closed doors by yourself. That's okay. So that's key. So that's our second real talk time. It's our last one of the show. So I want to we talked about coping skills. So I'm going to give you 3 types of coping skills that are important ultimately. The first one is, are you a problem-focused person? Do you directly address the threat by trying to change the situation? This is good and bad. If you're changing the situation for what's in your control, that's fine. But if you're trying to be manipulative and change it to be to your advantage, that's a different story. That's not what we're trying to do. That's not being accountable and responsible. So if you see a threat and you can change it so it doesn't become a threat to you, but it also doesn't become a detriment for others, great. Find a way to strike the balance. 2, are you more emotion focused when it comes to coping with things? Do you try to make yourself feel better about the threat? Do you minimize the impact and the control? That can be a dangerous proposition, because you must keep things in perspective. If something is a legitimate emotional or mental threat to you, trying to minimize it for the sake of not dealing with it, that creates a mess. You must look it straight ahead. It doesn't mean that you might not be a little fearful when you're looking at it straight ahead, but fear is natural. Fear is something that helps us to react. Now, we talked about fight and flight and all that kind of stuff. It depends on what kind of person you are. But generally speaking, fear can be a very healthy thing. It's a reaction that's innate to humans to help them to know when they need to do something to be safe. So if you're looking at something and it kind of makes you feel fearful, ask yourself, why does this make me afraid? And then address it. That's key. Or are you a meaning-focused person? Do you change the way you approach a stressful situation because you see the opportunity for growth? That's amazing within itself. You say, okay, you know something? This didn't start the way I wanted it to, but I see this could have been different had I done this. Moving forward, I will do this. Or because this happened, it kind of changed my trajectory a little bit. But the direction it pointed me to put me out of my comfort zone. And now I see a new opportunity, or I just grew in a way that I didn't know I could grow. Are you paying attention to your individual emotional, physical, and mental growth? See, that's the other part of cleaning up messes. As you grow, it gets easier to be neater. Let's be honest, we hated doing laundry probably when we were younger and teens. We don't love doing laundry now, but as adults, we realize it's part of life. So we do laundry, we schedule it, and we move on. That's that. You get it. You're like, okay, because you know what? I need clean clothes to wear. You see the point of it. But the bottom line is that there can be opportunity in some of the worst situations. It's a matter of how you look at them. It's really, really interesting. So those are different, the 3 coping styles that exist when you're trying to kind of sort out your messes and how you deal with things that may be kind of creating those messes. So how can you address your messes? It's pretty straightforward. Acknowledge they exist. Stop ignoring your messes in there. The rug has a huge heap of dirt underneath it. You now need to pull it back and take care of it. That's a key thing. You must acknowledge it. 2, identify what you own. Sort what truly belongs to you. What is your mess? What's their mess? And what's our mess? Sort those things out. And 3, manage what you own. Clean by control. So ultimately, if you know you're responsible for certain things, take ownership of it. And if you can change it to make the outcome better, or just by owning it, make the situation better with someone, so do it. But if it's something outside your control and you legitimately can't control the outcome of it, then that's how it is. Let it sit where it is and know I absolutely addressed the things that I could, but I'm not going to obsess, which, by the way, people love to obsess on the things they can't change or control, but never willing to pick up the reins and ride that horse out that you can control. See? Big difference. Focus on what you can control versus what you can't. A lot of people struggle with that because it's way easier to look at something over here that was out of your control. Like, well, you know, if so-and-so hadn't done this, I wouldn't have done that. You didn't have to do that just because so-and-so did that. That's you reacting and not responding. So that's how it works. All right, guys, let's get to the final thoughts of the show. There was no Miriam today. She'll be back next week. I felt bad I didn't mention her in the beginning. I jumped right in because I was so excited to talk about this. But she'll be back next week. So Miriam McQueen is my musical muse. Make sure that you guys follow her on Instagram, iTunes, all those places. Go to miriammcqueen.com and you can grab her music as well. She'll be back next week. So here's a key thing. Life is messy, but it isn't about perfection, but living with purpose. Another fantastic meme I came across when it was all said and done. Life isn't about perfection. It's about purpose. And the same things apply with your messes. You're not trying to have this pristine and perfectly clean mental, emotional, because that's impossible. And you might drive yourself crazy just trying to achieve those things. That's not what it's about. It's about clearing up the things that definitely are taking more space in your life than they should, and creating issues and clutter and keeping you from being the best version of yourself. It's keeping you from being happy. That's the whole purpose, honestly, when you talk about messes. Life is going to be messy. It's never, ever going to be perfectly pristine. It's not. And actually, a little bit of mess sometimes make things interesting. What I want you to focus on is learn your primary coping style and start working on all three. So if you're more of an emotionally based person, that's great. But when you employ all three, that means you're hitting on all cylinders, cleaning up your messes, because you can emotionally see what's driving you. You can see the problem for what it is and try to fix and control it, and see the opportunity to grow. So the ultimate thing in coping skills is not to have one of those coping skills. It's to have all three and to utilize them as much as you can when you start to clear up these messes. That's what the bottom line is, that having multiple coping skills are so important to put into your toolbox. And this is like the fifth thing in this episode that we put into the toolbox. So that's it, everybody. This is episode 36. We're going to clean up your messes, and hopefully I've given you some things that you really can use moving forward. Something that you can say, okay, I got to be honest. I legitimately have not been as organized as I should be with my emotions, my thoughts, my finances, my physical spaces, my spirituality. I've really been messy about it. And that messiness has turned into disarray, discontent, and it's affecting me being the best version of myself. And it's clearly affecting my happiness. That's the bottom line. So until next time, thank you for listening to this episode. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And make sure you go to M.A.Y.A to listen to previous episodes. Remember, there will be a podcast resource to support this. So just go to M.A.Y.A, go to podcast resource section, and just click on there, and there'll be episode 36, some additional companion things that you can read to supplement this particular podcast. Hopefully by now you have subscribed to my YouTube channel. And if you have not, call to action right now. Do a couple things for me. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search M.A.Y.A. That's the key thing. Click on that, as well as make sure you are following me on Instagram and Twitter. That's Maya_Akai, and Facebook. Maya Akai Presents is how you tie in. And of course, if you're listening to my podcast on other podcast platforms, I won't hold it against you. Just make you subscribe there as well. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify. You can find me all those places, but you must put in Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and then my podcast will pop up and you can listen to all of the 37 episodes there. I will strongly advise you on this. And someone mentioned this is what they did, and I say it all the time. If you're joining me somewhere in the midst of my episodes, like at 19, there's nothing wrong with that because they're freestanding independent episodes. But there's a podcast thread that has just flowed through the whole thing. I would encourage you to go back to episode 1 and do the work to catch up, because I feel that each one reveals something that you can probably use to work on getting to that best version of yourself and figuring out how to maintain happiness on a consistent basis, on a daily basis. So I can encourage it. It doesn't mean you're going to go, but that's my recommendation. And someone else told me they're doing that and that it has been very helpful for the things that they've missed. And each episode gets a little bit richer because they're building a foundation on working towards being that best version of herself. That's it for this episode, everyone. Remember, until next time, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So make the most of every single day. Ciao. Be safe. Be well. Stay blessed.
Get inspired. Get motivated with Maya Akai and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find Maya on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai. On Facebook at Maya Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything Maya at MayaAkai.com.